In the marble lobby, a phone rang in Dutch. No one expected the woman pushing a cart to pick it up and answer fluently. The mop squeaked as she pivoted, the lemon scent of cleaning fluid lifting into the chandelier light. She hesitated because rules were strict and eyes were everywhere. Never answer calls on the floor, the head of operations had said. Yet, when she said hello in Dutch, the voice on the line replied with a name that belonged to a world far from stain remover and room keys. The guest in the corner raised his glass and looked up, his gaze sharp and oddly familiar. He was Marcus van der Meer, a man whose signature on contracts could change careers. Lucia Park, the head of housekeeping, stopped mid-walk and stared. The rulebook was simple, the outcome was not. That brief exchange, a language spoken in passing, would become the spark that threatened jobs, exposed contracts, and promised a long overdue reckoning. The next morning, the charge for breaking protocol became a public spectacle. In a narrow office lit by a single lamp, Peter Hargreaves, the operations director, leaned forward and spoke with a voice that left no room for doubt. "You know the policy, Rosa," he said with a clipped stare. Rosa Delgado smelled coffee and commercial bleach as she listened. "Yes, sir," she replied. He named the clause, then smirked as if the clause alone justified his power. "We cannot have staff representing the company without clearance," he said. She tried to explain the call was brief, that it was a scholarship inquiry. "A woman who cleans cannot run into meetings," he added, and the word discrimination hung in the air like dust. Daniel Osei, the concierge, watched from the doorway, his jaw tight, and Javier Cortez, the sous chef, passed the window, both avoiding the look. "You are not making this about me," Rosa said. "You are making this about control," Lucia answered softly from where she stood. The meeting closed with a warning letter and the thin sound of an envelope sealing. The humiliation had a public dimension that mattered. Contracts with international partners, upcoming conferences, and a fragile reputation now balanced on how the hotel judged a single voice. How could expertise be visible when power enforced invisibility? That night, doubts crowded Rosa like the hallway outside the staff locker room. She had a backstory that did not fit the neat category the hotel assigned her. She was the eldest of four, born in Rotterdam to parents who had migrated and taught her both Dutch and resilience. As a child, she had listened to translated lectures on a battered radio and mimicked pronunciations until the broadcasts sounded natural in her mouth. She studied languages in night classes, worked double shifts to pay for certification, and earned a small diploma in translation from a community college. Later, she lost a scholarship that would have taken her to a European university because a Guardia signature was missing and a small administrative error flagged her file. That loss taught her two things she never forgot. One was how bureaucratic negligence could derail a life. The second was that aptitude often remains hidden behind paperwork and the quiet work that keeps buildings running. In the present, she cleaned rooms, but she also translated contracts at home, corrected subtitles for an independent documentary, and advised a neighbor on visa paperwork. Her competence was both an invisible thread and a source of fury she kept folded in her chest. She lay awake listening to the hum of the hotel and felt the sting of being called merely a cleaner. Memories of her mother knitting in a dim kitchen returned, the smell of cinnamon, a stern voice encouraging persistence. She rehearsed answers for the next day as if rehearsing for a small, private tribunal. The backstory connected to the conflict like a seam showing through a worn jacket. It explained why she could not let the warning letter become the final word. Pause and listen for a moment. If this story makes your blood boil or your chest tighten, think of someone you have seen made invisible at work. We want to hear those stories. Share a short comment that begins with "I saw" and tell us in a sentence who was made invisible and how you reacted. Your words matter and can guide future investigations. When you write "I saw," please give a location and one detail so others can learn from what you witnessed. The community here has helped bring evidence to light before, and your comment could point us to the next case. After you comment, we will read and consider your account when researching similar stories.
Now, let us return to what happened when an unexpected ally reappeared at the hotel and offered a way forward. A call from an unexpected quarter changed the course of events. Marcus Vandermeer approached the front desk the next afternoon with a polished look and a voice that indicated familiarity with power. He had been listening in the lobby the morning Rosa had answered the call. He requested to meet Peter Hargreaves and then asked to see the staff roster. "I spoke to her," Marcus told Peter when they were alone in the glass-walled office. "Her Dutch was flawless," he said, and his tone carried more than curiosity. Peter replied with a guarded laugh. "We have standards," he offered. Marcus went on. "We have a conference next week with a delegation from Rotterdam, and we cannot afford poor translation." He then suggested a trial. "Let her sit in on the preparatory meeting and translate live for an hour. If she fails, you can dismiss her for breaking policy," he said. Lucia, who overheard, felt a quick rush of hope that tasted like warm tea. Daniel Osei felt a flicker of fear and possibility. Priya Singh from HR, whom Marcus had called earlier, sent an email copy to the hotel directory proposing a temporary accreditation. The offer was a door. The risk of losing employment remained, but for the first time an ally inside the guest circuit had opened a corridor for her talent to be seen. Preparation involved both practical work and quiet strategy. Rosa spent 3 nights mapping the agenda, annotating terms, and practicing industry vocabulary. She refined translations of hospitality contracts, prepared alternate phrasings for diplomatic tones, and memorized names of delegates so she would not stumble on stage. The technical step that mattered was a contract audit procedure she employed to highlight discrepancies. She extracted clauses line by line, compared invoiced amounts to actual service dates, and highlighted repeated markup patterns that suggested irregular procurement. This procedure, described simply, consisted of isolating counterparties, cross-checking invoice dates, and running a search for duplicated vendor names across months to reveal suspicious repetition. That 3-step task revealed a pattern of inflated maintenance contracts that matched dates when the hotel underwent renovations. Rosa shared her annotated excerpts with Marcus and Priya in a small envelope. Their reactions were tactile and audible. Marcus tapped the paper with fingers that smelled faintly of expensive cologne. Priya skimmed and said softly, "This looks like audit evidence." Daniel encouraged her, "You need to be precise on the day." Javier called her in the kitchen to say quietly, "You got this." The preparation was both technical and communal. The day of the preparatory meeting felt like walking onto a stage lit by fluorescence and whispered expectations. The conference room smelled of coffee, printed booklets, and polished wood. Cameras were present because a corporate webinar would be recorded. There were many dialogues and exchanges, 8 in the main sequence, that decided reputation. Marcus opened with a formal greeting. "Thank you all for being here," he said. Peter responded, "We expect a flawless session." Rosa, seated at a side table with notes, listened as Dr. Helen Kwan, a visiting academic, asked for clarification on indemnity clauses. "Can you confirm the timeline on the subcontract?" she asked. Peter attempted to answer and stumbled. Rosa then intervened. "The clause refers to fiscal quarters," she said, in Dutch for the delegates, then in English for the room. "It states responsibility shifts at the 3rd quarter and includes variable fees tied to a vendor code," she explained. Dr. Kwan asked a follow-up. "Do you have the original contract?" Rosa pushed a printed version across the table. "Yes," she said, "here is an amendment that was never initialed." Priya leaned forward and asked, "Who prepared this amendment?" Peter tried to deflect. "Our procurement handled it," he said. Marcus asked directly, "Can procurement justify the markup?" Peter sipped water and gave a short laugh that did not land. Daniel watched with clenched hands, and Javier mouthed a silent yes from the doorway. Each exchange increased the tension, and the room seemed to shrink. Rosa remained composed and used a precise phrase to translate an awkward legal term. Her expertise reframed the debate. People began to take notes. The antagonists grew tight as their control loosened. The audience, both in the room and online, sensed the stakes. 3 moments of tension defined the path forward.
First, during the reprimand, Rosa felt the weight of possible dismissal, and the memory of the lost scholarship collided with the present, making the air taste metallic and urgent. She considered silence and imagined the word dismissal stamped on a thin paper that would make 3 mouths behind desks relax. She chose to speak anyway, and the choice felt like stepping across broken glass. Second, while preparing contracts, she found a sequence of payments with the same vendor identifiers shifted across accounts. Her hands shook when she highlighted the lines, and her mind flicked back to nights balancing bills for her family. The decision to take copies to Marcus and Priya required courage, because she knew those papers could be used against her. Third, in the full session, when Peter tried to reclaim control and the live stream was running, a momentary pause froze the room, and she felt a collective intake of breath. For a few seconds, she saw faces from her past and present, the smell of coffee, the hum of the camera, and the possibility that truth might be louder than policy. Each moment pushed her toward action and away from invisibility. The public exposure unfolded like a careful investigation. With Marcus and Priya backing the claim, the hotel commissioned an independent audit that began the morning after the conference. Priya arranged interviews, and Dr. Helen Kwan connected the team to an external consultancy. Naomi Fisher, a journalist who Marcus had contacted, prepared to attend the next executive session. The audit process followed professional steps. Investigators extracted procurement logs, matched invoice numbers to project timelines, and verified banking entries against contracted deliverables. In 300 characters, the method is simple to outline and crucial for credibility. Investigators cross-matched vendor identifiers, ran duplicate search queries, and verified signatures against archived originals. The results were telling. Evidence showed repeated use of an external contractor, with sudden jumps in billing amounts coinciding with renovations recommended by a manager connected to the contractor. The pattern suggested nepotism and collusion rather than market variation. When the audit report landed on Peter Hargreaves' desk, the room felt small. He tried to explain. Marcus asked precise questions about chains of authorization. Priya read passages aloud, and Javier sat motionless. Rosa watched as words like audit and evidence began to shift the power dynamic. The exposure culminated in a packed executive meeting that felt like a verdict. 8 people spoke directly in the room and on the record. Naomi began by stating the findings in plain terms. "This report shows irregular procurement," she said. Dr. Helen Kwan affirmed the technical aspects of contract translation and accreditation of the documents. Priya presented the timeline. Marcus named the affected contracts and asked for retribution, but also for systemic fixes. Peter tried to defend himself with a practiced tone. "We followed protocol," he said. Priya countered with emails that traced his approvals. Daniel described how rooms had been removed from refurbishment schedules to favor the external contractor. Javier testified about overheard calls, and Lucia described internal memos she had saved. Priya then proposed a remedy, including a third-party audit, immediate suspension of the implicated manager, and an inclusion program to credential internal talent. "We will start a certification and translation program," she said. The phrase diversity and inclusion echoed in the room, and for once, it felt substantive. Marcus asked the board to consider replacing a vendor and to open a complaint portal. The CEO, whose name was Evelyn Brooks, listened and then announced an internal investigation and steps toward restitution. The moment when Peter stood and realized the board had shifted against him was almost silent. Later that week, his resignation was submitted. Names of those affected were read publicly, and momentum began to build as local media amplified the findings. The fall of one manager signaled that a crooked contract could not stand when a voice insisted on scrutiny. Immediate consequences arrived swiftly and unevenly. The implicated procurement manager faced suspension pending a full probe. The external contractor lost a set of active contracts, and the legal department froze payments while a forensic review took place. For Rosa, the reward was tangible and emotional. She received an invitation from the hotel owner to participate in an internal review panel and a formal apology from Evelyn Brooks.
Priya recommended a promotion and a certification path that would recognize language expertise as a career track. Daniel, Lucia, Javier, Marcus, Dr. Helen Kwan, Naomi, and others were publicly acknowledged for their roles. The hotel announced a small fund for staff training and a promise to audit all large contracts over the past 5 years. Rosa hugged her mother on a phone call and cried with gratitude. Yet, there were complexities. Some staff feared retribution. A junior manager who had been a silent witness received a caution for late reporting. The system was imperfect but shifting. The spectacle of accountability made colleagues feel seen. Rosa accepted a temporary role translating for international guests and was enrolled in a certification program. The immediate aftermath blending relief with cautious optimism. 1 month later, the hotel released a summary of reforms, and the early effects were measurable. The audit closed with a recommendation to revise procurement protocols, debar certain vendors, and create a transparent bidding platform. 1 month yielded a policy change, the institution of a staff translation accreditation, and a commitment to appoint an ombudsperson. 3 months in, independent oversight began. The hotel established a small scholarship for staff education and partnered with Dr. Helen Kwan to design a curriculum. They identified 42 employees with skills the company had overlooked and started to fund their certification. Rosa had completed her first accredited translation course and trained
colleagues including Javier, Daniel, Lucia, and Priya on basic contract literacy. 6 months later, the transformation had deeper roots. The hotel reported cost savings due to competitive bidding, a 23% reduction in unnecessary maintenance expenses, and the launch of an internal mobility program called Visible Talent. The program offered mentorship, paid certification, and a pilot rotation into operational roles for staff with identified skills. Marcus partnered with a local university to sponsor an annual fellowship, and Naomi continued to follow up with a profile series that amplified success stories. Rosa had been promoted to junior coordinator for guest liaison and translation and was leading a workshop on contract literacy. Her family had stability, and she used her new salary to secure a small studio for her younger sister who was finishing university. The institutional changes included a permanent inclusion committee, mandatory audit of large vendor contracts, and an external helpline for complaints. What began as a phone call in Dutch had produced measurable reallocation of resources, a revision of credentialing practices, and a shift in who was called upon to speak in meetings. The hotel, once rigid, began to open doors in ways that could be tracked and presented in numbers. This story leaves lessons and invitations. Talent had been present in a person labeled invisible. Evidence and procedure clarified that nepotism had allowed inflated contracts to persist. An ally from the guest list used influence to create an opening. A technical audit provided the proof that transformed accusations into institutional action. The immediate and longer-term outcomes included resignations, promotions, the creation of a scholarship, and the Visible Talent program that enrolled staff across departments. Rosa joined a panel on diversity and inclusion that met with Evelyn Brooks and Dr. Helen Kwan to refine hiring and promotion practices. Daniel applied for a role in guest services, and Javier enrolled in a hospitality management certification financed by the fund. Naomi followed up with a piece that highlighted 147 employees across the region who might benefit from similar programs. The final image is simple and human. Rosa walked the lobby months later, the cart left to store paper, her hands free to hold a tablet displaying a certificate. She paused beneath the chandelier, breathed in the smell of fresh coffee, and saw colleagues who once avoided her now greet her by name. She called her mother, and their voices overlapped in laughter and tears. If you are moved by this story, do leave a comment starting with "I saw" and name one person who was made invisible at work. Share a short detail about what happened and how you reacted. Your voice helps uncover patterns that can lead to real investigations. Subscribe to follow verified cases of discrimination and corruption and to see how evidence can become the basis for institutional reform. Because the lesson remains clear and hard-earned. Talent exists everywhere, and the real question is who we decide to see.